And now, it's time for another Dice Tower review with Ryan Metzler.
Hey everybody, it's Ryan Metzler here, and today we're going to take a look at a game that has a subject that is near and dear to my heart, at least kind of. We're going to take a look at Wrong Chemistry, a science-based or science-themed abstract game in which you're trying to move pieces around a board and actually manipulate the board itself, the pieces of the board, in order to make different elements. So real quick, we're going to open this up and see how the game plays, and then we'll come back here and we'll get my final opinions on Wrong Chemistry. So here you can see the components for Wrong Chemistry. Now I've set it up for a 2-player game, but essentially it's going to be the same setup for a 4-player game where each player will have 4 cards at the start of the game, and the board will always be set up looking like this at the start. Now this is an abstract game in which you're trying to use moves, either moving these pieces or moving the tiles of the board, in order to try and make different arrangements and make different elements which are depicted on these cards. And as I said, each player will start with 4 cards. The cards have 3 different difficulties. You'll see they all have some arrangement of the tiles and the pieces. They also have a name at the top. This one is Strongium. Now these are all plays on real elements from the periodic table of elements. They have a periodic table number, the symbol, and the arrangement you need to make. So this one I need a black, and then 2 empty spaces, a white, another black, and then a piece that has been moved with a black on it. So you'll see it's not the normal circle that we start with because the tiles of the board can be moved. Whereas harder ones that are worth more points, this one's worth 2, are purple, and they have, more complex configurations. You'll see a lot more of the board pieces have been moved around there. And then we have even harder ones, which are worth 3 points, like Platinum here, that is a spaceship type shape, and it has a lot of the pieces removed from the board. There are no longer any white pieces there, and it's worth 3 points. Now, another important thing to note is I told you the periodic table of elements number is on these cards. For example, Selenium here is number 34. These are important because if you score a card and you happen to have a run of cards, even 2 cards in a row, 34 and 35, you'll get an extra point for each card in that run. So 34 and 35, let's say they're worth 2 points apiece, would be worth 4 points scored, plus the 2-card run is 6 points. So it's important to pay attention to those numbers and try and get numbers that are in a row. In order to do this, you're going to basically take actions on your turn. You're going to get 4 movement points or 4 energy or whatever you want to call it. You're going to be able to do 4 things on your turn, at least as a base. The first thing you can always do is you can use this Restartium card. That would cost 1 action. You would turn it sideways to show you've used it on your turn, and that resets this board to normal. So if you're ever too far away from what you think you need to do, you can always reset it to the start, so you're never really in trouble based on the cards you have in your hand. But that does take one of your actions. The other things you can do are all pretty simple. You can take a piece off of the board for an action. You may add a piece to the board for an action. If there is an empty board tile, you may move it to anywhere else on the board for an action. And you can also go ahead and move a piece from one tile to another for an action. So you can see through manipulating these, you'll be able to rearrange the board pretty well. The last thing you can always do is discard a card from your hand for an action. So if you don't like one of the cards, or you're cycling through the deck to try and find cards that can put you into a run, you'll certainly want to discard cards from your hand. But let's see what the goal is like here. So let's say it's the first turn and I want to make Strongium. We'll see that this card here requires some manipulation of the tiles and some moving of the pieces on the board. And so on my turn I have 4 actions. So let's go ahead and start. I'd need to get rid of this white piece because there's only 1 white piece there. So I could, for example, remove this white piece, and I also need to get rid of this white piece here. So that is my second action. As my third action, I may move this piece, because it's empty, over to here. And now I've got the right shape, but I have a black piece that's out of where it should be. And I can go ahead and move that black piece from one to the other for my 4th movement. And that gives me the shape of Strongium here. And I would be able to take this card, which is number 38, and put it in my score pile. So that's pretty much how it works. I could have discarded a card for one of my actions if I didn't feel like finishing this, or I could have discarded multiple if I didn't feel like moving it around too much and setting my opponent up for something maybe. The other thing you can do before your turn is over is you may use what's called Extramovium. Now, Extramovium requires that you discard a card from your score pile. And if you do this, you get to take 3 more moves. So it doesn't give you a whole nother turn, but it does extend your turn. The reason you might want to do this is perhaps you're trying to manipulate the pieces to get closer to getting one of the harder to score parts. So maybe Platinum here. You could manipulate the board more by getting 3 more moves. And you'd be trading in essentially a 1-point card for a 3-point card. Now, you got to be very careful in doing this because you don't want to break up any of your runs, and some of those 1-point cards may be important to your runs. So you got to be careful, but sometimes it's definitely a good idea to get rid of some cards from your score pile in order to try and take more moves to make a more complex element and score more points. At the end of your turn, you're going to count how many cards you have in your hand, and you're going to draw back up to 4. And so you'll get a new element to try and make. For example, I got hydrogen, which is a play on art, drawing trees. So you'll see that, they all have these punny names, and they all have the appropriate periodic table of elements number and the symbol. So after you've drawn, your opponent would, of course, take their turn, and they'd look at their cards and see what they can do to manipulate this board state to get it to be one of theirs, obviously trying to score more points than you. And they'd see, well, look, I've already got the setup of the right shape for palladium here, so maybe I can arrange these pieces through some careful movement in order to try and get it into that shape in 4 moves and get more points. So you're going to go back and forth like this, playing cards, trying to manipulate this board through the actions that I've shown you until this pile of cards runs out. And that will go faster than you think it will because sometimes you'll make 2, maybe even 3 elements on the same turn using the extra movium and the restartium cards in order to manipulate the board state. And when the deck does run out, essentially when one player is not able to draw back up to 4 cards, you're going to end the game. You're going to go through your piles after discarding your hands, see who has the most points based on the elements that they've created, as well as the runs that they have, and whoever has managed to best get runs and score points by making elements is going to be the winner. Well, there you have it. That is Wrong Chemistry by Mage Company, a 2 to 4 player abstract game with a science overlaid theme. Now, it's a comedic theme, one that I actually enjoyed quite a bit. I like reading the cards and seeing the way they made the punny names out of the elements, so that was a fun aspect of the game. In addition, I actually like the gameplay quite a bit, especially for 2 players, because there's a little bit more control of the board, there's a little bit less change between rounds, and you have a little bit more control. I think more players, you're going to have more shift between the rounds, but I guess that could end up okay as well because it may end up in benefit of you if the board gets shifted in a way that you like it. So take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. It could work out either way, but with 2, I think I had a little bit more control over how the board ended up. The key parts of the game are going to be 2 things. One, you're going to really need to manipulate the use of that extra movium card in order to get cards out of your pile that are worth fewer points in order to score cards that are worth more points. And getting the harder or the more point valued cards is going to take more moves. So you'll want to carefully discard cards from your discard pile, making sure not to break up runs in order to score higher scoring cards or cards that will give you runs. So there's a lot to pay attention there. And by making runs, you can certainly keep up in the game even if you don't have the higher valued cards. There's also an aspect to trying to leave the board in a situation that may be beneficial for your opponent, but will allow you to, accomplish something on your next turn. Now, that's hard to do because you don't exactly know what your opponent's going for, but I think through some clever, deduction, you can maybe figure out the position they'd like the board to be in on their next turn. So, there's that. The luck aspect of drawing cards is a little bit deterrent from this game, which makes the game, it's a good game, but it takes away from it a little bit. And I think some aspects of either having a card display that you can choose from, or a starting card hand of equal valued cards, or something like that would balance the game out where I'd like it a little bit more. But all said and done, I definitely like the theme, I like the gameplay, I like the simplicity of the movement, and I like the comedy they've included. So I'd say that all in all, Wrong Chemistry is a win for me. I'd suggest checking it out. And I would suggest trying the game if it sounds like something that's interesting to you.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.